Okay, so I'm Gowree. I'm a lawyer, but I will talk less on this panel. We have 5 panel members who will do most of the talking. The topic is very interesting. As you all know, we have several OTT services in India now, and everybody has been wondering what starting right, from the content itself. Let's first understand what really is being watched in India, who's watching it, what are the demographics, etc. So that gives you a good basis to understand what are the real good models of monetization in India. We will, of course, would request panel members also to share some international experiences, whether things that have worked outside India. How do you think that working in India? Does India require a different model of monetization? All these questions we will deal with, and I believe we will have about 5 minutes or so, for a quick question answer. So my question first to Siddharth, Manav, and Geet, in whichever order you want to take, is the type of content that is being watched in India on all these services. Please also share your insight on the geographical reach, as well as the demographic. Is the millennial real audience for you? Are seniors watching as well? So open for all three of you.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me on the panel. Uh, Realistically speaking, all of this in a big way has changed over the last 22, 23 odd months. I mean, there was data out there was certain amount of video consumption, but all of it really broke out in a big way over the last 23 odd months. And that's largely been driven on the back of two core values. One being that the price of data became so cheap that we got a lot more consumers coming and starting to consume, and video became the choice of consumption, and entertainment became the first choice of a consumption discovery. So that became one value. The other was the price of the device, and India being a single device, single household structure, all our consumption and what we see in services like ours, 90+% consumption actually happens on a mobile phone, which means it's an active device that we see. We see a lot of consumption that's happening driven extensively on short form. It's actually a myth that people are watching only movies on their phones. There's a lot of content that's being watched across the board, which are 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes of different forms of consumption value. About 50% of this gets consumed in Hindi as a form factor. Actually, the remaining 48% odd gets consumed in various different languages, and it largely plays out a similar broadcast trajectory, where about 34 odd percent happens in the south. You have then Punjabi, Bengali content coming out of Gujarati, Marathi being the other format of content consumption.
And English.
And English, obviously. English being a segment. With regards to the TG, we've seen that when it comes to mobile, you're seeing a very large mass consumption habit that is starting to happen. And that's a same way where you go about starting to create habit in consumption. We've also seen that when we put out series in products like ours, a very large portion of the consumer base actually doesn't complete the series. So this entire myth that there has to be a show, the show has to have 15 episodes, each episode has to be 22 minutes each. This is all, in my mind, a larger structure that's coming from more historic fundamentals. And those pieces are extensively changing in play. So today you can go out and tell a great story. And the earlier panelists also said the same thing. It's all about conversations, stories that you want to tell, and those conversations, if they can be told in 5 episodes, 6 episodes, they don't necessarily need to be 22 minutes, because this is digital, this is on demand, he's coming out there because he wants to consume you, and if you cannot link him from episode to episode and you can't carry him, he just moves out and goes out and consumes something else out there. So it's all about creating funnel, creating great stories and conversations, getting the user to come back through features and product experiences where you get him to come and consume in different formats of device. So that's the phase 1 of consumption that is starting to happen. This is really early days for us. We all have massive amount of consumption. There's obviously big data out there that is starting to play a part. Each of us are bringing in technologies to figure out what kind of segmentation, what kind of user consumption habits are being formed, and how can we then go back and be able to speak and tell a story back to the same audience.
Yeah, I think that's all valid points that Siddhartha raised. I think one of the beautiful things about the way technology has impacted the content, I think that was your question, is that today in Indian languages, including English, we see types of content designed for audiences that did not exist 23 months ago. Take examples like, Skyfire, right? A science fiction serial about something that, I don't think we would have seen that kind of content coming out of traditional Bollywood or even the television industry. Yes, we have 800 odd channels in India, but I think the content that was available on those were democratized into what was largely popular. The technology now, going direct to consumer, allows targeted focus as to, even for niche groups, to get the kind of content that they want. So if somebody likes sci-fi, they now have it available. In the other, they would be forced to watch sci-fi on one of the global platforms. So I think that's one very important thing. I think the second important thing with digital is, I come from Gracenote and we've done television EPGs forever. But that was essentially the information provided by the broadcast channels, right? So we would tell people what's coming on which channel at what time. Today, I think with the digital technology, the choice is with the consumer. They can go in, they can search what they want to watch, when they want to watch it. They can watch it for 15 minutes and then watch the remaining 5 minutes at some time later. And I think that's the other superb advantage of technology and digital. I come from a technology background. I'm new to this industry. But it's fabulous to see, what happened, let's say, in manufacturing or in banking, 10, 15, 20 years ago, is now finally coming into the entertainment world with the advent of digital and streaming services.
So, if you look at YouTube, right, which is the lowest common denominator when it comes to mobile video, right, as two of them have already spoken about, mobile plus data plus content. Out of about 260 million or so MAUs which they have, their own data recommends that 88% of total consumption is non-English consumption, right? So when you ask about what India consumes, and I have launched Alt with Ekta in the past, from a India content specifics standpoint, it is wide chasm between Nagin and Narcos, right? So you have about 120 to 150 million, English-speaking audiences who would still be consuming, Stranger Things and Narcos, but that 800 million people, right, who have never had that option to consume, right? And if you step back and look at it from a device split, standpoint, India has been an entertainment-starved country, right? Against 1.2 billion people, we've had only 170 million cable and satellite houses. We've had only 200 million TV households. For the very first time, there are 1.2 billion phones, and we are the only country on the planet that's adding the largest number of smartphones per quarter, right? And thanks to, geos of the world who have now allowed consumption beyond top 5 metros to go to the next 50, towns and cities where a lot of consumption is happening. And for them, this is the first screen that they would ever consume, right?
So what I'm hearing is, in terms of, from a choice perspective, there is a plurality of choice, right? And the second thing is, in India, still the regional languages or Hindi still rules.
And will continue to
rule, yeah. So, yeah. So moving on, I think the penetration, etc., the points that were made, I just want to know, before we dive into the monetization element, do we have enough digital infrastructure? I know the answer is no to today, but what is the plan? What do you see? I think Nikhil and Prashant, and you want to answer that? No, why is no, and what can be done, and how do you see with 5G, ATC, etc., coming in? What is the horizon for next 2-3 years?
So in terms of infrastructure, I really don't. Number one, I don't see it as too much of a concern because the Indian user is going to view it the way they want to view it, and that's why you've seen many of the platforms rolling out download options because people will wait to watch something. But in that sense, we are still in a dial-up era, and it's when you have something like 5G, when you actually have 4G level, you have 4G level 4G instead of 3G level 4G, that there'll be actual on-demand, real-time consumption taking place. But I think the challenge that our country faces is that we may have leapfrogged the wireline era, but that leaves us with a problem that can only be solved by wireline unless it's by 5G. And in that sense, I think the government's plan to roll out Wi-Fi hotspots, we've been hearing about it for a long time, the BharatNet initiative for taking Wi-Fi to villages, all of those things will be useful. We're just waiting for them to be executed. I mean, this is something that's been talked about for the last 7-8 years now. And it's you need wireline connections to take the load off the airwaves, unless 5G can solve that problem, I think. So, but that said, I think historically the content industries had two problems online. One is of audience and second has been of monetization. The audience problem has been solved now. I mean, if you go back to, I don't know how many of you even remember this, but there used to be a site which actually Hungama acquired called Nautanki TV back in 2008, 2009. And how they acquired audiences was by building a distributed video streaming network where I on a blog could embed their channel, because it was difficult to aggregate audiences. So we went from people trying to build, dedicated sites to attract audiences, to distributed networks, to a situation where everything finally centered around YouTube because someone had to take on the cost of streaming, to a situation where now people have dedicated platforms. We've come a long way in the last 10, 12 years, and we don't have an audience problem anymore. Monetization is a different story.
Yeah, we'll come to monetization. But I think I would also want to understand is the CDN penetration, whether that is going to be which is you believe that is going to be a requirement or not.
So there are two other parts to, and I'd like to touch base that with all the pain that we have with regards to concurrency of usage and data, there is obviously data which is proven that today the average Indian consumer is already consuming, even short of our wireline networks, at roughly between 9 to 11 gigs a month, which is phenomenal, even with this trying infrastructure that we have. And obviously the telecom networks are continuing to evolve their networks, add in more infrastructure to give us that better experience. So the fact the price of data falling has it's been a 10x, 15x, 20x growth in consumption, and that is still being driven on the back of the infra that we have.
And that about 70 odd % of that is video.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because video is where actually the most amount of concurrency happens.
If you look at the latest Hotstar numbers, right, where with the ICC going on, they have come out with the data that they have been able to achieve more than 10 million concurrent users for the very first time for any live event globally, right? I think YouTube's last benchmark was about 9 million or south of 9 million. So I think from that standpoint, if you look at all the key ingredients of a video consumption at scale, is already available in the country. And of course it is, it has been a chicken and egg story. Now that you have models coming up, now you have content coming up, and because smartphones have penetrated to that extent, you will see all these pieces coming in together. So there is no...
I'll actually add to what Manav is saying is if you are certain of the eyeballs that you are to catch, like IPL is a mega event, and you are certainly sure that you will get enough eyeballs. the infrastructure is not a problem. You will definitely, who doesn't want viewers? Right now we are sitting here to discuss how to get more viewers and more viewership. If you are certain of that, and then you will create that infrastructure. Infrastructure is not a showstopper as of now. Rather, the differentiator between television and digital is there is a reverse channel that is available in digital.
The RPD, the return path there.
Return path, which is actually not getting utilized in the manner which it should be. There is great amount of experimentation which is pending, which can give more insights, which can rather give a different insight about consumer and audience than the traditional information demographics and geographics that we have.
Yeah, so because you mentioned about this, and I think you come, with a Nielsen background, is the digital data, the way we have, the audience rating data, is that something which is happening, and to what extent for us, to sort of figure out the monetization before we go to monetization?
Okay, so 2 points. I come from Gracenote, which belongs to Nielsen, but I'm not in the research part of Nielsen. Having said that, yes, I think what's required today is, and I think my colleagues at Nielsen have been speaking about this globally for quite some time now. Today, the consumer behavioral data resides with the streaming services. Now, that's true for music, that's true for video. I think what's being asked for by various parts of the industry today is there a common currency, just like we had it in the TV world, that could be made available? However, I think the important question that comes up with that was relevant in the days of ratings, which then drove advertising, ad sales, etc., that the traditional broadcast TV had. I think in the subscription world, it's a completely different way of looking at things, which is, there's no advertising, that's why we have subscription, right? I subscribe because I don't want to see ads. So how is that going to impact both the content producers, the content distributors, as well as the advertisers is, I think, right now an open question.
And the other fact is that, look, digital is the most democratized structure, which way. We're so transparent out to advertisers already. So when an ad today gets served, chances are it's being served on a programmatic guaranteed stack, which actually is a third-party stack, resting with the brand, the advertiser's agency, and they're actually serving. They're being able to already account for that impression and be able to give an effective ROI based on what the quality of return customer that I've given them. Now, keeping all of this in mind, okay, that part of the business continues to extensively. Today, ad tech and the kind of stuff that we are starting to see come about, first party data, the entire impact of the DMP coming in, where large media companies, large advertising companies have the ability to bring first party data, be able to put out cookies, be able to start building out consumer profiling based on that layer. All of that is today already happening. So that part is already living a very different life. And when that is brought into destinations and media traffic like ours, it basically latches onto that, because I am already generating this eyeball, and if advertising is the way to monetize it, then for me, I am more than happy to do that, because when I connect a DFP or a Facebook, they do exactly that, but they're completely opaque. They give a value stack of the user to the advertiser doesn't know what happens, and that opaque part of the business fundamentally runs on a thing called performance, how much money you spend, what is the effective final value I've got from the user.
Which is the need for a common currency, at least in the part that's supported by advertising.
Correct.
By advertising, not by subscription.
Yeah, so for the audience purpose, maybe quickly, what we are talking about here is the AVOD as we call it, it's advertise based, service. SVOD is simply subscription based, where the platforms basically earn their revenue simply out of subscription, right? So there are these models that are being discussed here. But moving on to now monetization, advertising, AVOD, it's straightforward. But when it comes to subscription, in the Indian context, with so many services available, I have to constantly choose, do I take X, Y, Z? Do I take all three? Not. Do I take just 1 month? Do I want to do a pay-per-view? Is it available? What do you believe with so many services in India? What is the real thing? Because I don't think anybody necessarily will take all the services.
I'm not the content guy here, but
Yeah.
let me go first. Three
Yes.
words: content is king or queen.
No, but I mean, the reason I'm asking because your friends tell you XYZ service, so and so series superb, but you're not on that service. So, do I get motivated only because of one series to subscribe? I mean, these are the questions. I just want to sort of have some.
I think
brainstorming
it's the
sessions.
same as it was in the broadcast TV days, frankly. Again, maybe going out on a limb here. Did you care whether KBC was on X channel or Y channel? You wanted to watch KBC, right? Or whichever serial. I don't think it's about the platform as it's much about the content that's coming in today. That time airing on that channel, today streaming on a platform.
So,
I think there, in that, of course, now with regulations changing, now the things have changed. But there, we just had 1 month, cable, 500, 200 rupees given, everything you get, right? There was no choice, or we didn't have to sort of apply our mind. Today, of course, for even television, I have to do that. But I mean, just to answer your question on that.
So
front,
let me
yeah.
actually move back and talk about the cut the cord phenomena. India's never seen it. We, for the longest time, have paid a $4, 250 rupee cable bill. Which market in the world gives 800 channels at 250 rupees? It is unheard of. Nowhere in the world do we have such a mature TV cable business where such large amount of content programming comes to us at such cheap prices. Okay. So when the transfer to digital has happened, consumers are not moving out of TV in India. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay. That's the first big myth in play. We chose to consume one channel. We paid for 250 rupees. You may continue to consume that one channel today on TV and still pay the same money. There is a la carte that's happened. TRAI is building that piece out. We are aware of, as consumers, how challenged we have been over the last 4 months to get that activated in play. So there is that part that's happening. With regards to which format will work, I believe all horses are running. Okay, it's too early in the game to figure out where this will go. India has largely been a advertising-led market on the broadcast side. In India, the telecom ecosystems are bringing in packages. They're bringing in values within those packs. We've seen it in the case of Airtel, Jio, Voda Idea. All of them are running programs where they're bringing in data plus content in play. If that gets hidden as part of your data pack, you're getting a certain set. Each of these guys are already aggregating people like us. So today when you go to Airtel TV or you go to Vodafone Idea product, that product has a Hungama, has an Eros, has a Sony Live, has a Z, in some cases even has Star in play. So that aggregation is starting to happen. Okay. With regards to sashaying that aggregation, that can be led on the back of data, bringing that sachet in. People like us have built our businesses in what I'd call is the 1.0 ecosystem, which was completely sachet, because India is a 99% prepaid market from the telecom ecosystem, per se. The pay-per-view business in India does not exist till a few years back. It is only in the digital ecosystem that the pay-per-view ecosystem has come in, and all big studios are already restructuring the pricing from a GDP perspective, keeping Indian pricing in mind. So what you go out and you consume Annabelle, for example, which is theatrically getting released here, you would see that being horror as genre, it will come in very few theaters in play. But you will see this getting broken very fast on pay-per-view. And there is an audience that is willing to. And the classic case study on this is Showcase. The classic case study is Showcase on Airtel, Showcase on Tata Sky, which have actually delivered extensive numbers based on audiences and the ability to pay for that product. So our point of view is that too early to say. Content is genuinely king in play. You go out and tell those stories, and you hope that the customer pays for it or then waits and consumes it in an ad-funded experience. Because each of us are not necessarily taking a position which states that we have a windowing funnel that's happening for the kind of content that we're putting out there in play.
So Sid, when OnMobile bought Dilithium, Arvind Rao went on to on record to say that India is going to be a circuit switch network and not a packet switch network. And guess what? It's a packet switch network now, right? And so I think the underlying delivery mechanism might change. It might be broadband or wireless, but cord cutting is, to my mind, is happening and it is going to happen. It's not a question of if, but when. And so I would, I would say,
when is not because of the price. When is when the customer feels
to my
comfortable.
mind, so to my mind, the first step that's been taken in that direction is by switching to the a la carte model for TV subscription. That actively allows users to question the choices that they're making in terms of which channels they're subscribing to, as opposed to getting an all-you-can-eat option, right, for a particular price. And you're going to see this translate to them evaluating a digital service versus a traditional service. And you might see an increase in cord cutting. I'm not sure about how soon it'll happen. For that, our networks will definitely have to improve. But you have a space which is relatively or comparatively unregulated, uncensored, where people can watch the kind of content that they would like to watch instead of that being decided by a bunch of people on a screen.
Agree.
Users are going to make those choices. They're already making those choices. So I think cord cutting is definitely happening, and it's going to continue to happen. You cannot. There is no medium that can compete with the internet because of the diversity, the plurality, and the options that it gives to consumers. And the fact that data prices have dropped have allowed more people to come online and get those choices.
Which are the cord nevers. I think the point Sid is making is the cord nevers. So cord cutting will happen at some pace for sure, but I think the real explosion of consumers is on the cord never generation.
See, Nikhil, adding my bit is, if it was the case, and obviously that's the case, all the broadcasters are turning into OTT platforms, and that's the validation enough that the content is actually getting consumed via an alternative pipeline, and there is enough and plenty of growth. It's just that what you are catering to that pipeline, is it unique enough, is it differentiated enough from the traditional medium? And definitely this will happen.
So I'm going to differ slightly there, because there's a different model in play over here. And broadcasters are big, and that's because the flaw in which the traditional distribution model operates in India, where you have a carriage fee that has to be paid by the channels. For the first time, the content owners are getting an opportunity to become
D2C.
To become broadcasters in a sense and own their customer, get the data about what's being viewed, as opposed to just being providers of content or providers of channels to the distribution. That unbundling which has taken place and the net neutrality which the internet allows is what is enabling that shift for the broadcasters. They want to be away from the distribution networks. If they had a choice, they would do it today.
No, and I completely agree to the fact that on TV, the content was to households, and the fact is mobile, it becomes a 1:1 experience where that becomes an immersive, single screen only experience. And the intent of speaking about the fact that there is a massive difference between the West and us is largely coming on the back of the cost of entry, which was the reason, one of the biggest reasons for cord cutting in the US was that there was $150 cable bill that I paid, and on top of that, if I wanted to see baseball, I paid a certain amount more. Here for $10, I got access, and probably a Hulu and a couple of others put together. For $20, I got about 3-4 services where my entertainment needs were satiated as such. So that was the comparative I was doing.
Sure. Now, coming to, what technologies are coming in, because we are also talking about AR, VR and things like that. So do you believe that if you just have to do a crystal ball gazing, where do you see this entire piece moving, including the AR, VR and overall consumption pattern in next 2-3 years?
So I think from India standpoint, it is very, very small. It is minuscule, largely because these kind of immersive experiences require a capital outlay towards equipment and investment in those AR, VR headsets. But from a storytelling standpoint, it is again one of the most emerging mediums. I mean, we've just heard and seen how the latest Lion King is actually not shot outdoors at all. Imagine a complete movie being shot inside a studio and not an external frame. I think so. From a movie making standpoint, from a content making standpoint, a lot of those technologies are being deployed. But I think at a scale, from a B2C standpoint, we will look at it at a scale once the cost of the device drops significantly. And I think India has shown to the rest of the world that once you have the right price point, the consumption at scale just follows.
I won't take a call on predicting the timeline, but I think we talked about, let's say in India, the television viewing experience being a family affair. We talked about now about, services going direct to the consumer, so now it's going to an individual, but it's still the same content. I think we saw a very early example with Bandersnatch, where there was a kind of personalization of content, where it's now unique. The content itself is unique to the individual within a certain limited set of choices, but it's still unique to the individual. So my viewing experience of the same, essentially the same content, it will be different from Sid's or from Prashant and all these guys. And I see that happening going forward. Again, I won't predict a timeline on that. I think there'll be technology dependency, there'll be content creation and creativity challenges. But I see that as the next step, personalization of the content, true personalization.
And I agree with Geet here, because AR VR is probably a narrative technology which allows you to engage yourself, allows you to put yourself into that virtual world. It will be immersive, not because of the technology. It will be immersive if the storytelling, if the story needs it. I quite often ask myself, what if the movie Avatar was not made in 3D? Would it have created same kind of impact? So whether the story needs it or not will be the driving force for this technological advancement.
Technology for sake of technology is not something that will work. It is something which is sort of the story should demand that technology, I guess.
I mean, even if you see 4K, that's a basic device change that's coming in.
Right.
But India currently, even if content's being shot, we don't have the core infrastructure to be able to provide that content in.
Sure.
So that's an interesting, and that's the reason why non-fiction has been one of the biggest acceptors of 4K. So you see a lot of work that Discovery, NGC all did in the first set of phases, where a lot of content on 4K has been created.
Right. The last question, because I just got a note that we need to finish early. So quick last question is on the customer acquisition. In the Indian context, what has worked, what hasn't, insofar as customer acquisition?
So everything has worked, everything hasn't worked, right? I mean, OTT is about 3 to 4 years play, right? What we've seen is the tip of the iceberg. I guess a lot of consumption patterns are emerging. A lot of data, is being created and being redeployed. But from an acquisition standpoint, I think Indian consumers, it's a misnomer they don't pay, right? The question that you should be asking is, what is it that you are selling? If it is exclusive, if it is, not available outside, if it is of quality, the consumers will pay. From that standpoint, if you look at the acquisition funnel, right, there are a lot of exercises, a lot of experiments that have happened, right? When I launched Alt, which was only with 6 shows, and all those shows were in Hindi, we said that we'll give you 1 episode free on the platform. You share your name, mail ID and credentials, you get 2 more episodes free, right? So imagine if there's a 10 episodic arc show and you've seen 3 episodes, then at least your reason to pay exists and your belief in the story exists, right? And that started to create a lot of consumption. So I think Alt is one of first such examples which showed to India at large and which broke the notion that Indians don't pay for content. Indians do.
So in terms of cost, you'd call it as cost per acquisition or the core funnel. Our take in this is that you can go out and create funnels through various forms. You can go out and create discovery through device. So if you remember over the last 4 or 5 years, that entire ecosystem has moved. It started by saying that there's a device, embed your app, and there will be discovery through that. As the funnel became a lot more mature, it started happening, okay, so you have now given the device, but what is the price of the device you put the product in? Because we had data which suggested that after a certain price point, the quality of the customer, both in terms of consumption and stickiness and the funnel for pay, gets reduced further. So we started focusing on, if we were to look at the device, on a certain quality of device. Okay, the quality of device led to say that, okay, so if this is the journey, I have 30% of them not lighting up. Our question back to the device owners were that, look, I'm not going to pay you for the light up. I'll only pay you when the customer activates the app. Okay. Today, each of us run extensive amount of attribution. We try and understand where does the consumer come from, what does he do. We today have historics which can state to you definitely that with a definitive meaning that if this consumer comes in, he comes in 4 times a month, and if he comes for 2 months, I will be able to have X percentage of consumers who will go through the paid funnel. So those are the journeys that we are currently working on extensively. Discovery on device, discovery, advertising, and how do you go about doing performance advertising, how we are working towards bringing in a lot more ad tech to understand that the entire ad tech fraud ecosystem and the amount of advertising fraud that is there, that itself is a separate journey. And each of us have lived through that and are continuing to live through that as another piece to the overall play as well.
So just one little point that you guys need to see how the data protection bill shapes up. It's expected to be tabled next week, and that's going to have a fairly significant impact on the advertising ecosystem and the kind of data collection and personalization that happens. And therefore, your delivery and personalization is going to get affected.
So do you think that would drive towards subscription model, which is not ad supported?
I would think
profiling.
Yeah, that's
it's not just profiling, but also targeting. So
Yeah.
it's going to drive people more towards the subscription model
yeah.
because consent is basically the bulwark
Exactly,
of that
yeah.
particular framework.
One small point on tech. I mean, obviously we talked about content, etc. But I think there's also one element of technology that gets sometimes disregarded is in the consumer experience on the service, on the app or on the UI. I think the UI, UX, and they're two very, very different terms, UI and UX. I think that's also, so let's imagine this, if you have the same pieces of content on 2 different platforms, I personally would go for the simpler UI, right? So I think that's one element also that can help in customer acquisition. Well, maybe not acquisition, but in consumer retention. Because if it's a very complex UI, I may not want to continue on that.
I think the other issue that I know at least some of our clients are facing is on the subscription is the recurring payment, right? So where,
Which is a retention piece.
retention piece. So that's getting resolved, in a bit. So at least, but that was one of the hurdles also that was being faced for, retention part.
No, so in the RBI vision document for 2020, they've clearly said that they want to enable recurring payments.
Historically, that was, one of the issues that was being faced, which also will be resolved.